Hi, today we're going to talk about why are the Russians so great at wrestling. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. And let's get to it. So there's no doubt that Russia is highly dominant in wrestling, right? As well as all the former Soviet republics are also quite dominant wrestling too. And yes, someone has to ask why, right? And this isn't to say that the US or other systems aren't dominant, because we have other dominant systems that aren't Russian-based or from the Soviet Union, such as US wrestling. I mean, top of the top. Iranian wrestling, Cuban wrestling, Turkish wrestling, Japanese wrestling, Indian wrestling, etc., etc., etc. Even Korea has a very strong wrestling program. But of all these, there's no doubt the big bear in the room, no pun intended, is Russia. So why is Russia so dominant in comparison to other countries, and why does it always dominate, or at least is at the top of the medal count? And there's several reasons why. So first, let's go to the first reason, which is Russia has extremely deep roots. Like, wrestling has extremely deep roots in Russia, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that other countries don't have it, but you have to understand that in Russia, it's very common for fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers, and lots of generations of men in a bloodline to all come from some type of wrestling background. And it might not be freestyle wrestling or Greco, but it's a type of wrestling, okay? Now, just to give you an example, just from this old Soviet republics, not just internally in Russia, you have a lot of different cultural wrestling and grappling styles that have definitely influenced the Russian wrestling system today. One is, for example, Chidaoba and Khridoli from Georgia. You have Koch from Armenia, Gulesh from Azerbaijan, Koras, which is a Tatar wrestling style, which is in Russia, Kurash, an Uzbek wrestling style, Alish, a Kyrgyz style, Gores, a Turkmen style, Kushtengiri, which is a Tajik wrestling style, Kures, a Kazakh style, Khuresh, which is a Tuvan style from Siberia, and Tranta from Moldova. Now, you notice a lot of them have the same kind of Gulesh, Koras, Kuresh, because it's all kind of related. Now, each style has a little bit variations in how they would score points or allow grips, etc. But all these types of cultural wrestling styles were always inside the Russian character and all the countries surrounding Russia. Okay, and it produces a very interesting area of the world for wrestling. Now, the next we're going to talk about the wrestling system. There is a big difference between Russian coaching and, let's say, American coaching in other countries. And I think the biggest difference, where I would say, as a wrestling enthusiast and a guy who practiced wrestling, I was never a great wrestler, but I was a good wrestler, and having a father from the Soviet Union, is seeing that Russians have like an ultimate focus on technique. Now, this doesn't mean that like other systems like America doesn't have a focus on technique. But for example, let's say America, they're very technical. I mean, if you get a guy like Jaden Cox or Kyle Dake or David Taylor, or from the old school, like any of the old guy of the Four Horsemen, if anyone knows that, put in the comments. Let's see if you know your wrestling. Very technical guys, but there was also a very big physical element. And the Russians are physical monsters, but they're extremely technical from all aspects, from, you name it, from grip fighting, to getting reversals, etc. Very unorthodox takedowns. Their technique is another level. And even Dan Gable said the same. I think it was on Joe Rogan. He said that, you know, the Russians are just technically ahead of us. And there's a real logic to it. Russia has a very intense wrestling system, Okay, it's very developed in technique. They produce incredibly high amounts of wrestlers who have good technique. And yeah, for example, so you have John Smith in the States, Dave Schultz and Les Gutches, you know, these guys were on, I think even the Russians would say, wow, these guys are on par with us technically. And yeah, for sure. But they don't produce the same amount of technical monsters as Russia does. And I think where it is that there's a lot of emphasis on creativity in answering problems associated with opponents. For example, let's take Jordan Burroughs. Jordan Burroughs, one of the best wrestlers of all time from the US, multiple time Olympic champion, world champion, etc. Probably is one of the best, if not the best, double leg takedown of all time. Amazing wrestler. But to a lot of people's surprise, Gaduev from Russia beat him. Okay? And the question is, how did he beat him? How could you beat a guy like Jordan Burroughs? And it was definitely through development of technique and creativity in solving the problem, which Russia is definitely known for. Another thing that Russians are really good is the long-term development of a wrestler. Okay, unlike the U.S. or other countries, where, you know, in elementary school you have a certain wrestling coach, and then junior high you have a different coach, and high school, and then you go to hopefully college, you know, collegiate, and a different coach. In Russia, generally, it's very common to stay with the same coach or one or two coaches during your whole career. And this enables the total development in terms of long term of an athlete. So, for example, if a guy knows his athlete, if a coach knows his athlete since age, let's say 5 or 6, 10, they've developed every single aspect one by one of this youth and into an adult, etc. And you can really develop an incredibly technically sound wrestler that, for his body type and his wrestling style and his mentality, it's always been the same focus on developing. The American system, in comparison, is kind of like a constant sprint, and the emphasis is always, most of the time, on hard practices and full gas training, which definitely shows its benefits. I mean, when anyone wrestles an American, you know, they know they're in for a hard fight. I mean, any wrestler, it's going to be a hard match, but usually, generally, when you talk about like very physical wrestlers, it's going to be the US and Cuba. But Cuba we'll talk about another time, because that's an entirely different wrestling system that's interesting in its own. So yeah, long-term development, that's where the Russians are very different than the US, okay? Another thing is Russia really emphasizes in knowing total package wrestlers. So what does that mean, total package wrestling? Now, generally there's more of an emphasis on understanding both throwing as well as leg attacks in comparison to US wrestlers. And this could be a lot to do with US wrestling having a huge emphasis on folk style and collegiate wrestling prior. Different rule set than freestyle wrestling. So that has to be taken notice. But in Russia, the throws that they have, as well as the entrances into the throws and using sometimes their legs and setups with throws, are definitely, in my opinion, much higher level than we see in the States. And what happens is you start having a much more total package in your wrestler, on the average wrestler. Of course, if you look at the elites, you know, elite wrestlers and elite wrestler, but in Russia, generally, they can do everything, and they can do it very well and surprisingly technically at the highest levels too. There's another thing too, that I call it the street cat versus the house cat, okay? So life in Russia, no doubt, is much tougher than in the West. A lot of the guys come from areas that don't have proper heating, not the greatest food. Food can be scarce at certain times of the year, harsh winters, and even regional conflicts. And they make for a tough mentality. And it's not saying that you don't have this in the States, because You know, if you go to like a Midwest US, like some of the states there, you get some really tough farm boys and you put them into wrestling, they become tough as it gets. But in Russia, there's some type of mental toughness that they have where they just want to succeed, you know, and they do it through discipline a lot of times, right? Not through just hard work, but also discipline. Like, you know, for example, if you take a guy from Dagestan or Dagestan, as they say, and they have regional conflicts since the 90s, you know, and it's a lot of violence in that area. You're getting a tough guy, you know, he's not, or a tough woman, which I haven't seen women wrestlers from Dagestan so much, but you're getting a tough wrestler, and that wrestler, when he comes to the match, he's going to give everything, and he's coming to kill, to destroy, you know, and he's going to do it technically, right? So the street cat versus house cat. I'm not saying that U.S. wrestlers are house cats, but there is a different thing. It's a little bit more comfortable system. A lot of guys have cars, or for example, they get back to their very nice life where they order pizza at the night, not when they're trying to cut weight, but you know, it's a much more comfortable life. Another thing too in Russia is you have superstar status that these wrestlers get. Okay, unfortunately in the West, wrestling just doesn't get the fame that you would see in Russia. Maybe now because of UFC, you know, MMA, you see a lot of wrestlers like coming up to top like DC, etc. Daniel Cormier, but it's still not the same as mainstream superstar status of you see in Russia. For example, if you say Sadulayev, he's on TV everywhere. Gaduev, he's on TV. Anyone who's a wrestling star, they're really thought as a wrestling star. Also, wrestlers at the top level in Russia, actually, if they win the Olympics or World Championships, they can get some very good financial benefits, right, from the state and from their local community. And they're literally looked at like gods, okay? Like, wow, this guy is a champion, etc. So that superstar status definitely, especially when you come from, like we said, the street cat where you have nothing, into becoming a superstar, not only a champion, it definitely has some bearing on the mentality of an athlete. Because now, not only can you be a champion, but you could be like this star, etc., this success story. And that's something they have in Russia that unfortunately they don't have in the States. I hope it gets better in the US, and I think it is, especially with wrestling's emphasis in MMA, and most champions come from wrestling background, as well as in jiu-jitsu. Now there's a big influx of wrestling into it. But it's not like Russia. In Russia, they're really stars, you know. Now, final thoughts. Every country produces wrestlers, and some of the top wrestling countries have amazing talent. And this isn't to say that one wrestling style is better than another, because at the end of the day, the American approach produces outstanding wrestlers. I mean, really top quality. But the Russian approach does as well, and it's different. And with Russia winning so many world championships and beating the best wrestlers around the world, one must ask, why are these guys so great at wrestling? And is there something to learn from this? And of course there is. Now, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow my channel. And until then, enjoy and have a good day.